down and got sworn in. That's kind of a scam that they run. They bus in lawyers from all over the country, and you get sworn in, and you pay $400. And the joke is all that money, all the lawyers want to say they're admitted to U.S. Supreme Court, and all that money goes to keep the law library gilded. But we were the last group, I believe, that Rank was sworn in right before he passed away. So it's kind of interesting. And I've been waiting because you have to be admitted to file the case down there and to have your name on the documents. And I've been waiting for a chance to get there. And I'm hoping that I have some credibility now, because if it's just me, the Supreme Court justices, they're going to kind of put one eyebrow up. But with a prestigious Syracuse University law school attached to it, perhaps they will, say, oh, look at this. This must be important. If you guys want to know what that issue is, I'll talk to you about it sometime. It's not that exciting from a radio viewer standpoint. 243-1200. If you have a legal question you want to get here in on the air, 243-1200 or 697-4297 or 866-532-9466. So whatever questions you want to talk about, or you guys want to tell me a story, I'm going to be trying a jury trial Monday morning. I already picked a jury for it up in Perry County. That'll be interesting. I can report back next week on how that turns out. I like the case and prepping it. That's what I'll be doing tomorrow. And if anybody's been on a jury, of course, we always invite you on the air here. I always want to hear what your experiences were with the jury room, because A, it helps me later, but B, I think nothing's more fascinating to people. I quite frequently get asked by people, how do I get on a jury? Well, you can't get on a jury. You have to get picked, and you don't really get picked. What has to happen is the government has to spin the lottery of jurors and drag you in. And then once you get there, you have to make the smaller panel, and then the lawyers exclude people from the panel. So they bring out 35 people, and I knock off 7, and the DA knocks off 7, or the civil litigators each knock off 5, and the next thing we know, we have our remaining jurors. So we don't ever actually pick you. We get stuck with you. It's really more the better way to say that, because you're the people they gave us, and we ran out of strikes to get rid of you. It's sort of like in the Olympics when they used to drop, they dropped the high score and the low score on the theory that the American judge is always giving a bad score to the Russians, and the Russian judge is always giving a bad score to the Americans and a good one to their own people. So if you drop the high judge and the low judge, you get the medium judges, and that's the best judge of what's really going on. That's kind of the theory of jury picking. So if you want to get on a jury, all you got to do is make sure you're registered to vote or have a driver's license. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're an attorney, obviously, but are there professions that are exempt from jury duty?
That's a good question. The answer is not, generally speaking. Now, there was a time, going back a few years, where in New York State's got a great example because they almost codified it. They had basically some court rules saying, well, I'm a doctor. If you're a doctor, you can get out because you might have to be treating patients and that sort of thing. And then they realized at one point that they had added so many professions to the list that almost anybody with a heartbeat could figure out how to get off of it by describing their job the right way, or using one of the catch-alls, and so they got rid of it. And our courts here in Pennsylvania pretty much take the standpoint. I mean, here's a typical question. When we were picking this jury up in Perry County, and Judge Quigley says, what do you guys have? Anybody have a pre-planned vacation for this week? And if you've paid for tickets and airfare to go somewhere, he'll excuse you. If you say, well, I was going to drive up to Selinsgrove and meet a girl from Craigslist and see if I can get stabbed, as happened just the other day in the news, he's going to say, if that's your vacation, is like a day trip or something like that. We're not. We note it, and maybe we'll strike you because we don't want you. Well, what would we say? Here, I got a quote for it.
You're pissing me
Oh.
off.
Wow.
Right. And that's what you don't want. You don't want the juror who's now told you that they have the vacation get stuck on the trial because they're not going to be happy. So sometimes the judge will ask about that, but he'll leave it up to the lawyers to strike them with using one of our preemptory challenges, but not take them off for cause if it's something minor. But overall, we're pretty firm with the jurors. If you have a surgery or a medical thing, and the one that comes up quite frequently, for some reason the jurors are older than average. And, I have to take my husband to his prostate checkup on Tuesday or something like that. The judge sometimes will inquire, like, can anybody else drive? And they'll say, well, our kids moved away and no, or yeah, I could get somebody. And if they say, yeah, I could get somebody to do. So my point on all this is Yeah, the answer is there used to be a time when they would exclude a lot of people. Now, lawyers, for instance.
That's my question. Like lawyers, policemen, like court reporters,
Yeah.
people that work in the courthouse.
They can all make the jury, and they sometimes do. In fact, one of our court reporters here in Cumberland County was on the panel one time, and the joke was that they needed to bring in a substitute court reporter because, you know, they had lost one of their court reporters to the jury pool, and of course everybody waved to her every time she walked by. And no, I don't think anybody let her on a jury though, because what happens when you know people here, you know, if I'm the district attorney and I know the court reporter, and I'm the defense attorney, I know the court reporter. The way our minds work, I go, you know, she probably likes me. Yeah, she'll be good. She doesn't hate me. And the other side might think the same thing, but then you start thinking, well, maybe she's had to listen to me talk for all these years. Maybe she hates me. Maybe she just sits there and smiles because she has to. And so you start worrying that because they know you or know something about you, or if, you know, I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of people might be surprised by this, but maybe not. Sometimes the closing arguments of the lawyers sound suspiciously similar from one trial to the next. And so, you know, for instance, when I'm up against a certain district attorney, I can pretty much tell you what his closing argument is going to sound like, just change the names and change the crime. But the rest of the fluff and puff is all over the map, but it's the same pretty much. You know, he's got 5 standard arguments I expect to hear out of him. The court reporter who's heard the lawyers make those standard arguments before might not be as impressed. It's like a stump speech. You know, when President Clinton or Bush were traveling around the country, they gave the same speech every day, all the time, and everybody said, what a wonderful speech. And the campaign aides put their hands in their ears and said, boy, I don't want to hear that speech again. So for that reason alone, you might exclude them. And then with lawyers, the problem is, or court reporters or sheriffs or police officers, they might have particular knowledge of the law, or at least the other jurors might think they have particular knowledge of the law, and therefore they become too powerful. And we're always worried about one personality taking over the jury. But I think of a time I left a police officer on. I had a case where I knew that the police procedures were so junky and so bad in that particular case. I left a police officer, he was a Harrisburg police officer who lived in Cumberland County. I left him on the jury, and it worked perfectly because he told me afterwards, he said, I went back there and I let them deliberate for about 2 hours before I mentioned I was a police officer. And I said, why'd you do that? He said, well, I wanted to hear what they thought. And he goes, they kept saying, well, that officer said that's the way you do it, and that officer said that's the. And he said they bought everything the testifying officer said, hook, line, and sinker. He's like, and after they were ready to convict your client, I was like, well, let me interject here. I'm a city cop, and let me just tell you how this stuff actually works and why you actually do it this way. And after that, he changed it around, but he thought it would be interesting to see if they'd reached a conclusion on their own. And so you can see how that police officer. Now, the district attorney didn't strike the police officer because he made the mistake of thinking that the police officer would be pro-police. He was pro-police, but he was pro-good policing, not sloppy work. But interestingly, you know, the jurors just believed the officers. And that's a big problem, by the way. We just saw a case up in Boston where there was 40,000 cases. One person working in a lab tainted 40,000 cases. Not only did she not test drugs, okay, what they're finding out now is when she did test drugs, she sometimes would taint them with drugs to make sure they tested positive of drugs when they tested negative for drugs. And people may say, well, you know, how's a substance, how would you test a substance for drugs? Well, you know, like in your purse, you might have like a little old pill bottle that's got some old prescription pills in it or something, and they're not narcotics, and they're not controlled substances, and they're not illegal. But in the course of searching you or arresting you or beating up on you, the police will take those pills and send them to the lab. And they'll come back as vitamin C or vitamin B or your prescription, unless they have a person who works in the lab who cheats and makes things up. And so she tainted 40,000 cases. And they said, oh, my gosh, this is terrible. We're going to have to let a bunch of people out of prison, probably a lot of guilty people, too. What are we going to do? But, you know, this is an isolated incident, and it's one person, but it'll never happen again. And this is just so rare and well, in the course of looking and finding those 40,000 tainted cases, they've now identified another 180,000 cases where other lab people did similar things out of the same lab. This is all up in Massachusetts. But it's been found all over. There was a thing down in Philadelphia with the DUIs where they discovered a few thousand cases. They had given the wrong numbers because the machine was giving high numbers. And so people who were swearing up and down, they come into your office and they go, I only had 2 beers. There's no way I blew that high. And, of course, we lawyers look at them and say, well, the jury may or may not believe that. Just about 1,000 people got a DUI that probably shouldn't have. But it will never happen to you, and that's why you can live secure and just believe that the government will never wrongfully accuse you or prosecute. So it comes back to juries is jurors drive me nuts sometimes because they just believe a lot of what they hear. So if you go to the innocenceproject.org, there's 300 people who've been freed, more than 300 people who've been freed from life or death sentences, all of whom were convicted by juries, by the way, who turned out they didn't do it because the jurors just want to believe that when the government tells them somebody did something, they did it. 243-1200-697-4297. If you've got a legal question, we're going to be here for about another 15 minutes. This is your chance to get on the air and get it answered. We don't charge anything, obviously, but I have to remind you, when you hear a legal question answered here on the show, we have limited facts and information, and you, particularly not the person we're talking to, but even the person we're talking to, should not just rely on what I say because there may be factors that we would want to know about. So think of this as an opportunity to learn a little bit about the law and maybe get some direction. But if you hear me tell somebody to do something and you think you should do it and you think it's going to work that way for you, my advice is be careful because you don't have all the information. Jan, what's going on? Jay.
Yes.
Is
you, Carl?
Yeah, what's going on, my friend?
Well, yeah, I'm still listening. I try to rack my brain for a good legal question, which I don't have one that pertains to me, but I had a call in. This is one that kind of, I don't know that you have an answer for it,
okay.
But we see lots of cases, or we see cases where I think justice is based on the lawyer you have, the lawyer you can afford.
Right.
Which I don't know of a better way, I guess. Has the legal profession or anybody in the judicial area ever tried to figure out how to kind of even the playing field that way? I mean, short of regulating lawyers' fees.
Right.
I don't know of anything, but,
In terms of leveling the playing field, you mean for access to justice, right?
Access to legal aid, access to help.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you an example. I mean, I get these calls. I had a guy call me, and, his wife ran off with a child, and he needs money, but he's scraping to get by. He's working 2 jobs, and the filing fee in Cumberland County is $300 almost, okay? And I told the guy, I said, I'm going to need at least $500 to get this emergency petition filed. And he looked at me and he said, well, I can give you $50. And I'm like, here's the problem, buddy. we can't file it, right? I mean, now, I can go to the court and say, okay, my client's in form of pauperous, right? And I'm not going to take a fee from him. And therefore, form of a pauper, basically what that means. I'm sure you know. But long story short, maybe get the filing fee waived, but then I don't get paid, right? And as much as I would love to do free legal work as much as possible for 1 million people, it just doesn't work economically.
Sure.
So here's a guy, but he probably is in the category of person who might make just a little too much money for legal services, or he might qualify. But they also have limited capacity. We've had other people who don't have any money, but because their opposing party, who also doesn't have any money, went to legal services, they're conflicted out. And for some reason, the Family Law Clinic at the Dickinson School of Law is conflicted out. We're even lucky to have that here. A lot of people don't have access even to a law school that'll try to help out. So, yeah, it's terrible. And access to justice is a big deal because it's the same thing with criminal law. There's a reason why O.J. Simpson got acquitted. And some people think it's because he was innocent. Some of us think it's because he had I just got the glare. Some of us think it's because he had really good lawyers, okay? But with that in mind, the point being is he had really good legal talent. And there are people, not O.J.'s a bad example only because he probably was guilty, but there are a lot of people charged with crimes, and I mentioned the Innocence Project a minute ago. A lot of those people, if they had better access to lawyers and resources, might not have languished in state prisons for decades. So, yeah, there is no great way to do it.
That's what I was thinking, I was reading about. Or somebody who has connections. I mean, not even the legal help they get. But you see, how often do you see these people that commit white-collar crimes?
Right.
Around here, it seems like a lot of women who are working for a bank or some other organization in a fiduciary state, and they're robbing all this money. But they're mothers and wives